Bobby, how did preaching and then writing about Ecclesiastes change your life?
Yeah, it certainly exposed and continues to expose some ungodly ambition, some ungodly striving. Oh, a sense of kind of always wanting to do the next thing or get the next thing. If I would have thought, oh, I've got those kind of desires pretty well under control, I'm aware of pridefully striving after this or that. You sit with Ecclesiastes, and it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper.
Layers.
Yeah. And I also think that the sense of receiving life as a gift, recognizing how much is outside of my control, uh, recognizing, it's like the Calvin and Hobbes comic where I forget, Calvin says to Hobbes, if you could have anything, what would you want? And Hobbes says a sandwich, and what about you? And Calvin says, oh, I'd want to be supreme dictator of the universe and have people like command, and then Hobbes later he's eating a sandwich and he says, well, I got my wish. I think I think learning to receive what God has already given me, learning to receive the limits of the lot he's ordained for me as good for me, are lessons I continue to learn. Kind of my ambition butting up against hard realities and limits he's ordained. The kind of twofold, don't strive for the wind and receive the goodness of what God's given you as a gift. Yeah, that continues to bear fruit in my life.
Is there anything that changed, like a specific practice or thought or intention or plan that changed as you were confronted by Ecclesiastes?
The chapter on time was deeply personal. And these are even lessons I'm learning and working on right now and talking to my wife about. But time, we so often try to master time. And it's like what Lewis says in the Screw Tape Letters, at all costs, you want to foster this illusion that the subject is the master of his time, that the time belongs to him, that it's like a possession he can claim and say, mine. Ecclesiastes has so much to say about how we are not in control of time. Times will happen to us that we do not want. God is in control of them. And in this mortal life, under conditions of the fall, bad will replace good, good will replace bad. There's a time for singing, a time for mourning. There's a time for war, there's a time for peace. And there's a kind of merry-go-round quality to our lives that ultimately we're called to submit to and trust God in. And I think for me, okay, here's one very concrete practice. It didn't so much come out of writing the book, but I'm working on it now. I think when there's a clear providential assignment or limit, serve my family in this way, be with my kids, give this to faithfully steward the lot God has given me rather than striving for something else. To not view it mentally as kind of, oh, there's a trade-off here and I could be doing X, or it's competing with Y, or it's costing me in sort of, time management. It's costing me this opportunity cost that I could. Just if this is the providential assignment, well, it's just the thing I have to do. And it's the thing I get to do. And I should be joyful and cheerful in doing it. And yeah, there's a certain miserly mastery that's deep in my heart of the way I want to relate to time that I think Ecclesiastes shook loose and needs to keep shaking loose.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Um, Bobby, if more knowledge means more sadness, does that make us in the internet age the saddest people ever?
Well, I do think that kind of immediate exposure to every possible tragedy, disaster, I do think, as so many people have observed, and increasingly so in the past, decade, that is hard to handle, and we're sort of not really wired for that. And it takes some work to kind of put up appropriate boundaries for the things you're going to let yourself be exposed to. So yeah, they're in the internet age. I do think there we can experience the truth of what Kohelet says. Like I'm looking at chapter 2 where he has a couple of sayings about this. He does say some positive things about knowledge, but he asks like, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? In other words, there's a whole lot of knowledge and even wisdom you could accrue that will not change anything. And so maybe the temptation to view knowledge as a kind of intrinsic good or commodity that's always good to stockpile, yeah, that can especially tempt us in the internet age to then ask, well, what can I do about it? And maybe it's not the wisest investment of my time, my attention, my energy to learn a whole lot about a whole lot of stuff, especially a whole lot of bad stuff that I really can't do anything about.
Yeah. I mentioned in my introduction, Bobby, the categorical imperative of late modernity, which you summarize this way, quote, always act in such a way that your share of the world is increased. And one of the things we talk about a lot at the Keller Center are these cultural narratives, the stories that guide how we live without us even often knowing that the guiding. And I think you talked earlier about a market economy or an explorer nation or a settler nation like we are in the United States. I think this is especially relevant for us. Tell us a little bit more what you mean by this. And like I said, I think it feels like something we just assume in our day, but it would have been foreign to virtually all previous generations. And I'm talking about in the grand scheme of history, age of
Yeah. Yeah.
exploration, that changes a little bit. And there's always been people pushing boundaries and things like that. But I think just this sense that we always need more. I think
Yeah.
that's that's us, and it's not always been that way.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm borrowing that phrase and that concept from Rosa, and he's talking about how there's these different ways you try to bring more of life under your grasp to make it, as he puts it, available, accessible, attainable. And that could be experiences, it could be traveling, it could be money and then the resources and the things money can get you. It could also be in a more subtle or social sense in terms of your influence, your range of connections, your relationships. That could always be extended. You could always have a bigger footprint. You could always make more of yourself, kind of socially or in terms of your influence. Um, yeah, and I think that, and this is obviously sort of heightened and accelerated in the internet age. But it creates, in one sense, both a fundamental burden and an entitlement. The burden is I always must be doing more and kind of maximizing and optimizing, whether that's in terms of work or money, whether that's in terms of relationships. So there's a burden there. You have to make something of yourself. There's also can be kind of a sense of entitlement that contrasts strongly with Kohelet's repeated use of this idea of a lot, a portion. You know, a portion is like a portion of food. This is all that you get
Yeah.
served. Or a lot, it can also mean in the ancient Israelite context, the inheritance of land that you or your family would be given. And well, this many acres is only going to produce this much. You want to steward it well
Yeah.
and help it to produce in a sustainable way. But if this is all the land you have, it's all the land you have. And that's almost a concept that's just foreign in our society, where you would just kind of run roughshod. Oh, it can always be expanded. You can always buy another field. You can always get bigger equipment. You can always,
Can always get
you know,
another sandwich.
you can always get another sandwich. That's right, Hobbs. Why just one?
What, just one?
Yeah, and I think there's very sophisticated structures for attaining those things, for promoting those things, for pursuing them in a way that never turns off, for social media feeding them back to you in a way where you could always, want something more or something better. So there's a real discipline, as Kohelet puts it, to accepting your lot. That's not just a sort of grateful act of kind of receiving it and thanking God for it. I think there's also a discipline of bringing your desires in tune with it and into line with it. That is inescapably individual. Somebody else's lot is not my lot. Somebody else's family is not my family. Somebody else's work is not my work. God has given it to him. That's what 5:18 says. This is his lot. God has given us these days this work, and so it really stands in kind of direct opposition to that imperative to always be getting more or making more of yourself.
Is this the same thing, Bobby, as the problem of meritocracy? If everyone can be exceptional, then everyone must be exceptional. Just wondering does Ecclesiastes does Kohelet tackle the problem the same way of what you just described?
That's I do think it's relevant to that kind of critique of meritocracy, a la Michael Sandel.
Right.
I think Kohelet, he in living his kind of rise to the top, he particularly highlights it in chapter 2. And he highlights a couple of things, both in his first person experience and some of his observations in chapter 4. You can work yourself into a kind of anxious stupor, sleepless nights, being unable to sort of stop, unable to sort of detach from your work. He talked about that. He talks about giving himself up to despair because, like 223, all his days are full of sorrow and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is absurd. So I think Kohelet pinpoints the inward liabilities of a work fixation that, a number of scholars have observed, he kind of diagnosed the workaholic, 2.5 millennia in advance, or whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Mhm.
Chapter 4, verse 7, there's somebody who has nobody else to work for, no sibling, no heir, no family, but they never stop. And they never stop being enough to ask why. And so I think, yeah, in that sense, a meritocracy, if you view the world around you, particularly as a kind of like a pure meritocracy, you only have yourself to blame. Hard work gets ahead, fair play, make the most of the opportunities given to you. You'll rise to the top. So not only do you have to sort of be always working, but you only have yourself to blame if it
Yeah.
doesn't work out. I think those inward pitfalls of work being a kind of treadmill that your mind and heart and in a sense body can never get off of. I think Ecclesiastes totally spots those, millennia in advance.
Well, and combine that through, expressive individualism. You can be anything you want to be, anything you set your mind to, which is then if you set your mind to being a professional athlete and you fail, you have no one to blame because you didn't believe hard
Yeah,
enough.
and that expressive individualism saying kind of this is who I'm created to be, or sort of this is my deepest self, makes it even more of a personal kind of attack on your worth, an attack on your value. Ecclesiastes doesn't address this question directly, but there has to be. Like if you're aiming at that type of elite endeavor at any level, there has to be some way in which you can distinguish striving for excellence from striving for superiority, even in a competitive endeavor like sports. There's a winner, there's a loser, somebody comes first. There has to be a sense of, even as important as winning is, to use the cliche, winning can't be everything. I think Ecclesiastes would, yeah, in a sense, Ecclesiastes is a very anti-expressive individualist book.
Yeah. That's
Because
good. That's why it's timely for our day.
who you are is fundamentally given, not fundamentally
Yeah.
achieved. You have to start with the givenness of life itself, the givenness of every good thing in your life. Kind of wake up, look around. God has given you so much. What God has given you is always more fundamental, more important. It's a bigger deal than anything you make of it. You're required to be a faithful steward, but you didn't make it in the first place. He's the one, as it were, who cooked the meal. He's the one who apportioned it out to you. Your job is to eat and enjoy.
Yeah, the expressive individualist is more Rousseauian with the sense that I've been born into this world with inward desires that are always constrained by people on the outside and institutions and authorities. And my whole goal in life is to break free from those. And I break free from those by certainly by protesting them, but mainly by looking inside myself for guidance of how to resist them and how to ignore those siren songs of tradition and religion and family and everything else. And Ecclesiastes comes back and says, life is a gift. All of life is grace. And your problem is that you're prone without the guidance of the Lord to veer off a cliff.
Yeah, absolutely. And at a kind of infinite velocity, in the
Yeah.
sense that
True.
Ecclesiastes keeps highlighting that our hearts are insatiable. Uh chapter 6 verse 9, better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. You could even have something in front of you to enjoy, but then your appetite goes, well, what about something else? What about something different? What about something more? Or chapter 6 verse 7, all the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. I think Ecclesiastes is saying that as a kind of parable. You have to keep working to keep eating, but that's a sort of pointer to the deep structure of our souls, where I think receiving a good gift from a good creator is a key part of that. That's a more prominent theme in Ecclesiastes. And ultimately, kind of in light of chapter 3, verse 11, he's put eternity into the heart of man.
Yeah.
Ultimately, being satisfied in God alone is the only kind of, silver bullet, the only magic key. There is a way to be appropriately satisfied with the good gifts God gives you of food, family, work, enjoyment. There's an appropriate way to receive all those. But ultimately, the kind of happiness you're on a treadmill seeking to get is found in God alone.